Priorities first.
The government has confirmed anyone travelling directly from China to England from the 5th of January must show a negative COVID test before departure. There are no direct flights from China to Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, but the government says it will work with the devolved administrations to ensure measures are implemented there. It's amid concerns about surging cases in China following an easing of restrictions. France, Spain and the US have also introduced similar rules. Health leaders are warning this winter is likely to be the worst on record for A&E wait times. That's as flu and strep A cases continue to rise. Several NHS trusts have declared critical incidents, meaning they can't function as usual due to exceptional pressure. The Royal College of Emergency Medicine says over 90% of clinical leads reported they had patients who were waiting for more than 24 hours in A&E last week, and that the highest ever level of bed occupancy was recorded in hospitals in November at 94.4%. Meanwhile, ambulance staff are being told to conserve oxygen supplies due to a surge in demand. That's according to the Health Service Journal. South East Coast Ambulance Service has told staff it's caused by the high number of patients with respiratory conditions, which suppliers are reporting to be higher than during the first wave of the pandemic. The latest data shows the number of flu patients in hospitals in England has risen by 79% in the last week. And New Year's celebrations have already begun, with New Zealand welcoming in 2023. The city of Auckland began the new year with a fireworks display from the capital's Sky Tower and a light show over Auckland's Harbour Bridge. It'll be our time soon enough. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends with Calvin.
Welcome back to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson on GB News. I'll be with you for the next few hours this New Year's Eve, and here's what's coming up this hour. Our thoughts and prayers go out to Pope Benedict XVI, who has died at his Vatican residence aged 95. We'll hear from an editor at the Catholic Herald. It's New Year's Eve, which means a new honours list where over 1,000 people were selected for their exceptional contributions to communities across the country. We're asking, is the honours system fit for purpose? Expect opinions and debates. Plus, the NHS is complaining of mounting pressure as flu and COVID cases are on the rise. Is our healthcare system on the brink of collapse? All that and more. And remember, I want to hear from you. What do you think of the topics we're discussing today? Email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet at gbnews. Pope Benedict XVI has died aged 95 in the Vatican. He became the first pontiff to step down from the role in more than 600 years in 2013. Our reporter Cameron Walker takes a look at his life.
It's April 2005. White smoke rises from a chimney above the Vatican. A new pope, the 265th leader of the Catholic Church, has been elected. Pope Benedict XVI, aged 78, became the oldest newly elected pope since the 1700s, but also the first German head of the Catholic Church in centuries. Born Joseph Ratzinger in 1927, he lived with his Catholic family in Bavaria. Although his parents were anti-Nazi, Ratzinger was a member of the Hitler Youth. By the end of the Second World War, he was serving as a German soldier. Unwilling to fight, he deserted and was briefly held as a prisoner of war by the Americans. Ratzinger was ordained as a priest in 1951 and was awarded a doctorate in theology at the University of Munich a few years later. He taught at a number of universities before becoming the Archbishop of Munich and Riesling in 1977. He grew close to Pope John Paul II and became one of his closest advisors. Pope John Paul II died in April 2005. Joseph Ratzinger was elected head of the Catholic Church and became Pope Benedict XVI. He continues the legacy of his predecessor by speaking to other religious leaders, particularly Judaism and Islam.
Dominus Iesus confidimus.
He aims to revitalise the Church in Europe and maintains traditional Catholic values relating to sexuality and priestly celibacy. He visited a number of countries in the early years of his papacy, including new guidelines allowing more use of the Latin Mass. He directly addressed historical sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, speaking out against it during a visit to the United Nations, but he came under media scrutiny in his alleged role in the cover-up of sexual and physical abuse cases by parish priests and in schools. The Vatican denounced the allegations as false and calumnious and said its handling of the cases showed wisdom and firmness. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI announced his imminent resignation due to old age and ill health, making him the first pope in some 600 years to resign. More than 50,000 people crowded St. Peter's Square to watch his final public address. In this year's post-Christmas statement, Pope Francis made a surprise appeal at the end of his address to ask for prayers for former Pope Benedict, saying he was very sick. The Vatican issued a statement that he was receiving constant medical care. But soon after, the 95-year-old passed away in the Vatican, the home of the institution he'd dedicated more than 70 years of his life to. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Well, joining me now is Simon Caldwell, Associate Editor at the Catholic Herald. Thank you for joining us today, Simon.
Thank you for having me on. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here.
Very sad news that we're hearing today. Could you please give us your brief synopsis of what the Pope Emeritus meant to you?
He meant a tremendous amount to me. Along with St. John Paul II, he was probably my favourite Pope of the post-war era. I thought he was a wonderful man, a teacher of great clarity, a very gentle, retiring figure in his private life, but a serious intellect, a deep intellect, and a man of great courage. I mean, he really had to stand up and defend traditional Catholic values, the teachings of the Church, against all kinds of threats, and he was often vilified for doing so. But he showed us what the Christian virtue of fortitude meant, and I think his legacy is terrific. For me personally, I'm a great admirer of his teachings on conscience, and and this ties in with his own personal devotion to Cardinal St. John Henry Newman, who was his greatest hero. Ratzinger himself grew up in Nazi Germany. He served in the Hitler Youth against his will, and he ended up on an anti-aircraft battery. But as soon as he could, as soon as he was freed, he resumed priestly studies, and Newman was his passion. And part of that was because of Newman's teachings on conscience, and Ratzinger took that with him throughout his priestly ministry, and into his papacy. And one of the high points of his papacy was being able to beatify Newman in Cofton Park in Birmingham.
I'm glad you did address the issue of Nazism. I won't spend too long on it, but I do want to address it because I know a lot of haters will be using that as a topic to talk him down today. But he was a deserter from the German army, and he fought hard against Nazism for the entirety of his life. And I do want to re-emphasize that.
Yes, and he came from he came from an anti-Nazi family. His father was a policeman who loathed the Nazis. I mean, there were lots of Germans who were like that, and he was very typical of that particular group within German society. But in 1946, when he entered seminary, he became part of an intellectual movement which embraced Newman, and what they liked about Newman is precisely what Newman offered against totalitarianism. Newman was a great teacher of conscience, and they were rediscovering what it meant to be, what conscience meant in the face of totalitarianism, and Ratzinger was right at the forefront of that. He was he couldn't be more anti-Nazi.
Well, indeed, he's on record as saying of Marxism that it's a dictatorship of relativism, which I think is quite fitting and quite apt, to be honest with you. But he was also the Pope that was for reaffirming Christian values and Christian doctrine on issues like, being against heterodoxy, being against abortion and contraception, and of course, women's ordination, and even homosexual priests. Like, he really clamped down on these issues that are facing the church and have been facing the church for a long time now.
Yeah, I think what Ratzinger saw was that it's not our church, it's Christ's church, and we have a duty to pass on the faith of the apostles from the sacred revelation that came through Christ, from Christ and through the apostles, and it's not something that we can choose to change at our will. It's something which we've received and which we've got to pass on in its entirety to the next generation, so that they might be saved. And Benedict wasn't going to allow people to come in with all kinds of novelties and revolutionary reforms and this kind of thing. He said, no, this is a sacred deposit. This is something which this is what we hold to be true. And it wasn't that he was against homosexuals or against women or anything like that. He was upholding 2,000 years of Christian teaching, and said this is what it means to be a Christian.
Absolutely. And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to take advantage of the time we have on air to say a quick prayer for him.
Yeah.
O God, in whose presence the dead are alive, and in whom your saints rejoice full of happiness, grant our supplication that your servant, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, may enjoy the comfort of your light for all eternity, through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Simon Caldwell, Associate Editor of the Catholic Herald, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, the New Year's honours list, the first of King Charles's reign, has been revealed. Queen guitarist Brian May, players in the Lionesses and Grayson Perry are amongst the names this year celebrated for their work, contributions to the country, and King Charles will be awarding the titles in what will be the first time since the late Queen's 70-year reign. And with many changes to the system over these decades, we're asking, is the New Year's honours system fit for purpose? Joining me now is royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Richard, thank you very much for joining us today. We've seen lots of changes over the years. Could you run us through some of the modernisations that we've seen on the honours system?
Yes, absolutely, because some 20 years ago, it was unquestionably archaic. There were committees who made these choices. We didn't know who was on them. They were almost all male, very frequently dominated by the civil service, and the system had got unquestionably out of touch. In fact, leaks proved this. So from 2005, at least on the now 10 committees who make the choice under the Central Honours Committee, they aren't chaired by civil servants, and we know who's on them. We don't know their advisors. But nonetheless, the facts are that this has changed in several very, very significant ways. Some 60% of this list, there are 1,107 names on it, have links with philanthropy. In fact, in recent honours lists, it's been even higher than that. And what is so significant is that, therefore, in addition to the main job very frequently, you would have had some connection with charity and in helping others. The other great target, which they've, I think, achieved quite well, is gender equality. 50% of the honours go to women, and CBE and OVA, which are the top honours, some 45%. So on the whole, the system, it's become more diverse, more persons of colour are getting honours, and also it's less centred on, firstly, London and the South East, still a bit of a problem there, and the other issue is far fewer state servants get them. That has long been a source of a great deal of complaint. Only some 2% of people refuse honours. So it is overall a system that's pretty popular, and it also gives a great deal of pleasure.
I quite like that statistic that only 2% of people refuse honours, because it suggests that the vast majority of people are still monarchists deep down, even if they proclaim otherwise publicly. Richard, what is the purpose of the honour system?
Well, to reward excellence, to reward those who've helped others, who've served the country, who've helped exports. I mean, essentially, in a particular field, if you have excelled, there are those who believe that the central job, what you do is a reward itself. But in my view, and in the view of most people, that the country should also recognise you, whether you're in the Lionesses team, or whether you're Dame Mary Quant, who gets a Companion of Honour, whether in fact you're Dame Virginia McKenna, or indeed newly elected Dame or appointed Dame Denise Lewis. It does show that the country has recognised you, and also the ceremony where the Queen formerly, and now King Charles, or a member of the royal family, this is also very significant for you.
Fantastic. And Richard, I hear it's getting more diverse as well. Could you tell us a little bit, just briefly, about the statistics there?
Yes, as usually, I haven't got the statistics for this particular honours section, but usually it's in advance of 10%. There is no doubt also that in the Order of Merit, which is restricted to some 26, 27, the Queen's appointees had 6 appointees. In fact, they were quite recently announced, and 4 were persons of colour. So it has become far more diverse. There is the big question: do we want the order still of the British Empire and the various categories that has, and also the fact there's a British Empire medal that was reinstated by David Cameron. So the word empire still continues, and I suspect at some point that will change probably to British excellence. The problem is a large number of people already got them, and a lot of people don't necessarily want the change that's being called for. Several people have refused it because it has the name empire in it. But as I emphasise, the system has got a terrific advantage, and that is that there are various grades. So initiative and incentive are rewarded. You get one honour, and you want to strive to get another honour. And it seems to me that overall the system's reformed, it is working well, and obviously it's got to be perpetually looked at to make sure it's in line with contemporary thought.
Fantastic analysis, thank you very much. That's royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams. Joining me in the studio now is my good friend Belinda de Lucy. Belinda, what do you make of the honour system? Do you still think it's fit for purpose?
I think it's fantastic. I think it's a real treasure to this country, the envy of the world.
Yes.
We have been handing out knighthoods since William the Conqueror, and every monarch has sort of evolved the honours system as each century passes. Edward the Second, I think, had the Order of the Garter in 1348, or it might have been the third, and then Queen Victoria expanded the orders and the honours to offer so many more people. And then, of course, you had 1917 and 1918 when George V came up with this wonderful honour, the Order of the British Empire. Yeah. And we must keep that empire word in there. It is tradition, it is our culture, it comes from a wonderful period of our history that we should be proud of, apart from a few bad apples. And I hope it doesn't change to excellence. But it then included a huge amount of women as well in 1917 and 18, rewarding people in the First and Second World War, and as we go through the last century as well. It is about outstanding contributions from normal, ordinary Brits that go out of their way to deliver incredible results to their community, or outstanding in sports. It is magnificent. So I'm a big supporter. However, I find that politicians and civil service using the honours system unacceptable. I think there should be a totally separate award system for those in politics, because they are so near the seat of power, and they far too often reward failure. Look at Ollie Robbins in 2019. Right. Could anyone believe it, that the sort of Darth Vader and Skeletor of the Brexit years, who have been accused of constantly frustrating Brexit and delivering a horrendous surrender treaty that failed to get through Parliament 3 years, he was then knighted by Theresa May. And then we have the Home Office chief, I think it's Matthew Matthew Ryford. I think he has just been knighted, and he's overseen the worst migrant crisis we've ever had, and huge backlogs in passport controls, and he walks off with a knighthood. And I think that demeans and weakens the honour system. It's quite insulting to those who've really earned their knighthood when we give it to reward failure. So if that could be curtailed and politicians and civil service had their own reward system, then I'd be much more behind it.
So sound, Belinda. I agree with everything you say. Let's hear from an awards and honours expert, Leslie Hussell. Leslie, thank you so much for joining us. What's your take on the honours system?
I agree with both of your two previous guests in that I'm a massive fan of the honour system, because I think it does recognise amazing people, and right through every strata of society. You've got knighthoods going to, well, Sir Brian May, so a rock star, another knighthood to Professor Ian Campbell, a nuclear physicist. Then you go down to MBE levels with people in the community who are just doing fantastic work. Yes, I understand that it's not a perfect system, but what I think is brilliant is that it is now open to the public to make nominations. You can go onto the gov.uk website and download a form and nominate somebody brilliant around you in the community, in charity, in business. If you truly think they should be on the honours list, then do it. You know, you've got to be in it to win it. At Awards Intelligence, we help people, and we will very happily give anybody an honest assessment free of charge of the chances of somebody they think is deserving of an honour. I just think it's a brilliant system. It's joyful, isn't it? It's really celebrating the best of British society.
It's good to have some good news to talk about for once, isn't it? I'm with you, Leslie. So what is the process and how transparent is it? If, for example, I was to nominate someone who I think has done great work for charity, what's the next step in the process?
Okay, it's all about impact. So when you download that honours form and you fill it in, what you want to show is what they have changed for the better, how they've made Britain a better place at whatever level. Maybe they're an outstanding scientist, maybe they're an eminent surgeon, world level, maybe they're the local scout leader or a school teacher. But you have to show what they've actually changed. It's about the influence they've had. It's about inspiring other people. So you send the form in, it goes to the Cabinet Office, and then it's looked at and considered by one of those specialist committees that we just heard about earlier, Sports Committee, Health Committee, Business Committee. They then draw up their final list. It goes to Downing Street for approval, and then finally to Buckingham Palace to be rubber stamped.
Well, thank you for that insight. Good to know. That's awards and honours expert Leslie Hussell. Now, still with me in the studio is Belinda DeLucy. Belinda, is there a worry that this system might go a bit too woke? We heard that in the Queen's last honours, 4 of the 6 persons were are known as persons of colour. Is there this mood to try and over-represent certain demographics?
I'm not so sure. I think that there are plenty of people from all sorts of communities and racial backgrounds that have done extraordinary things for their communities and should be recognised for. I mean, Denise Lewis made a dame in this year's honours list. She has done incredible work for the Commonwealth Games, as well as winning gold, of course, for her country, and especially in sports and in also charity work. There have been a lot of charities now that involve many people from different races all over the country. So I don't think that's going woke. I think it should actually have nothing to do with colour or sex. I don't care if there's not 50% of women being honoured, as long as those people really deserve them. And the problem with honouring politicians, etc., is that they're not getting honoured for doing anything excellent. They're just doing their job.
So keep it down to merit. Keep
it down only to merit. There's a 100-year-old man that just got given an award for volunteering hours of reading at his local primary school at 100. I mean, little stories like that just lift the spirit.
So wholesome, isn't
yes.
it? Thank you. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. And after the break, the NHS are facing more pressure with reports of an influx of flu cases. We'll hear from our West Midlands reporter from a hospital in Birmingham. But first, here's a short break.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, welcome back. It's just gone 12:30. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Pope Benedict XVI has died at the age of 95. In a statement, the Vatican said he passed away just after 9:30 this morning within the Vatican City. Pope Benedict was the head of the Catholic Church from 2005 until his resignation in 2013. He became the first pontiff to step down from the role in 600 years due to old age and ill health. From Monday morning, people will be able to pay their respects as he rests in St. Peter's Basilica ahead of his funeral on the 5th of January. 4 members of the England team who won the Women's Euro 2022 are among those recognised in the New Year Honours List, the first to be issued by King Charles. Captain Leah Williamson has been made an OBE, while her teammates Lucy Bronze, Beth Mead and Ellen White have been given MBEs. GB News' very own Anne Diamond has also received an OBE for services to public health and charity, and Queen guitarist and animal welfare campaigner Brian May received a knighthood. The Prime Minister has admitted the last 12 months have been tough and warned the UK's problems won't go away next year. In his New Year message to the country, Rishi Sunak said the government will continue to tackle the NHS backlog and illegal immigration. He also said King Charles's coronation will bring the country together. The government has confirmed anyone travelling directly from China to England from the 5th of January must show a negative COVID test before their departure. There are no direct flights from China to Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, but the government says it will work with the devolved nations to ensure measures are implemented there. It's amid concerns about surging cases in China following an easing of restrictions. France, Spain and the US also introduced similar rules. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends with Calvin.
Now, pressure is mounting for the NHS, and this time it's not industrial action threatening their existence. Flu cases are on the rise, with a reported 7 times increase on the last month. According to new data from the National Healthcare System, there were 3,746 patients a day in hospital with flu last week. That's up from 520 a month ago, with 267 in critical care beds. Is the NHS system on the brink of collapse? Let's cross over to our West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, who joins us from a hospital in Birmingham.
Well, thank you, Calvin. There's around a 79% increase in these flu cases of people who've been admitted to hospital in the last week. Around 3,746 people were in flu in the 7 days up towards Christmas Day. That is just increasing week on week. That is in comparison to around 772 that were in hospital at the start of the month. So you can really see how rapid that rise in flu cases in hospital has been. In terms of critical care, as you mentioned, 267 people were in critical care with flu in the lead up to Christmas Day. In comparison to around Christmas last year, it was around just 34. So it's really bad flu season this year, but we know from past years that we do have differing flu season, but the variant of flu this year really does seem to be affecting more people than through other years. Here in Birmingham, the University Hospitals Birmingham Trust saying that they are seeing a worrying amount of people being admitted to hospital with flu symptoms, including the critical care units with respiratory failure as a result of a flu infection. Professor Dhruv Parekh, who's the Associate Professor in Acute and Critical Care, said that we have young patients, pregnant patients, as well as those who aren't typically ill, falling into that vulnerable category, experiencing serious complications because of flu, such as pneumonia and organ failure, and that these patients are now receiving critical treatment, including being sedated and ventilated. So this flu season hitting younger people that aren't necessarily always classed as vulnerable, a bit harder than other years. Of course, this is the first year in a good couple of years because of COVID restrictions that people have actually been able to come together for Christmas. So that might be one of the reasons why infections for flu have gone up so quickly in the past few weeks. In terms of what effect that has had on the NHS, with 111, they recorded a record 721,000 calls last week. That's up from around 706,000 on the week before. That's up 60% on this time in the same week in 2021. A lot of those calls was because of parents worried about, of course, we've had the rise in strep A cases, but a lot of those asking for advice on how to deal with flu and how to get round the symptoms and get through them. The NHS says it's prepared extensively for winter, and obviously we've had industrial action. We've got more industrial action to come. They said they've got plans in place to manage the rising demand, including around-the-clock system control centres, additional bed capacity, more mental health support for ambulance services and community full services as well. But the NHS saying if you need help on how to help stop and cure these symptoms for your flu, call 111 in the first instance.
Thank you very much. That was Jack Carson, GB News West Midlands reporter. Now, still with me in the studio is Belinda DeLucy. Belinda, it sounds like sensationalism to me. We saw on the ticker right there, twin-demic. It's winter. Everyone gets flu at the winter. Is that not the case? Has that not always been the case?
Absolutely, and I did recognise all that language coming back again with the twin-demic and overrun and patients on the floor, and it's all starting again. However, I was in hospital a couple of weeks ago with my third daughter who had this virus that's going around, and she was in a terrible state and coughing up blood and high temperature, and heart rate was going crazy, and all my daughters had it, but it particularly gripped her. And spending time in the paediatric A&E unit, There was barely any space on the floor, and it was mostly filled with young parents with toddlers, what I call sort of COVID babies that were born in isolation, that had no exposure to any kind of viruses, so their immunities never got to develop. We stole that from them, and now they're in hospital with slapped cheeks and worried parents and really suffering. So I have noticed a big difference, and I've spoken to lots of doctors, that there is a huge influx in especially the young and children being severely affected by the flu, far worse than COVID. And in fact, all the reports of kind of, testing the Chinese for coming into the country, much more efficient would be testing everyone to come in for who has the flu, because that's what's sort of crowding our hospitals at the moment. Not that would stop the spread anyway, but yeah, I have noticed actually quite a big impact, but I don't think it's as frightening as the media are making out.
No, I had it a couple of weeks ago. You'll notice during the breaks I'm coughing. I'm still trying to get rid of it, but it's just a bad cold is what it is. And we've been locked away for a couple of years, so our immune systems aren't as strong as they usually are. It's common sense, isn't it?
I think we just all need to be kissing more people under the mistletoe, spreading a few more germs.
Good recommendation. Thank you, Belinda. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. Plenty more to come this afternoon. We'll be talking about a look back at the sporting events of the year, from winning the Women's Football World Cup to the Olympics. Plus, we'll be sharing some tips and tricks on how to save the pennies in the new year. But first, let's take a quick break.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online. Across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. Over a drink, we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson on GB News. Well, it was a great sporting year for England's Lionesses. Lionel Messi, England's men winning the Cricket T20 World Cup, and gold for Team GB's women curlers. Let's take a look back at the year in sport. To do that, we're joined by sports broadcaster and journalist Aidan McGee. Aidan, thank you for joining us. Good year for sports?
It wasn't a vintage year, I wouldn't say, but there were certainly some standout moments.
Can't be vintage yet. It's still happening.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we've got a program. We've got some Premier League games today. Man United kicking off soon, so they have to go some to influence the entire year. But no, it's not been bad. I mean, it's I wouldn't say it's as good as some of the other ones we've had in recent times. But then obviously, given that we've had everything disrupted by COVID, it was good to see a full year of sport uninterrupted, and we saw some good moments. As I say, the Lionesses was a real highlight in the summer. Our women's team hadn't really hit the mark in terms of putting themselves on the map for a number of years. They got to the semi-finals of the World Cup, hoping to do well at the World Cup next year as well, or the year after, I think it is. So. But to conquer Europe like that and to get that momentum going all the way through, beating Germany in the final was really good. And they got and they got a couple of nominees for the Sports Personality of the Year as well. So that was good. We saw the Commonwealth Games. I think you'd have to call that a success as well. Some would say that it's probably a bit irrelevant now compared to maybe the Olympics and some of the major events we can get. But it passed off
Birmingham back on the map, didn't it?
Well, it did. I mean, the opening ceremony was pretty good. It was a bit less political than what we were used to in London 2012. But which was good. It focused on sport as well as some of the cultural history of the city as well. And there was a good legacy to the stadiums where they actually used it. They can actually use that site and break it down and put it to use for communities rather than have the white elephant that we've seen all over the world in places like Sydney and elsewhere and in Athens. So that was good. And then football-wise, we saw, Man City won the league title. Liverpool got to the Champions League final. There was a little bit of trouble there. And then coming into this year, I mean, who knows? Arsenal might even do it. The first time in 19 years. I mean, they were the Invincibles in 2004. They've gone nowhere near winning the title since then. But they made a breakneck start to this season. They're in action tonight against Brighton. They're not my team, by the way.
A lot of my family support Arsenal.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Your connection is Nottingham Forest, isn't it?
Yes. My grandfather used to play for Nottingham Forest.
Excellent. That's famous. Well, was he a big man up front, was he?
I don't actually know.
That's where you get your hype from. So I wouldn't say it was a vintage year. I wouldn't say. I mean, England's disappointment in the World Cup. You'd have to call it a disappointment to a degree. I think most people were tipping them to go beyond the quarter-finals. You can say it was a big missed opportunity because of Harry Kane's penalty. But again, 18 months' time, we've got the Euros. We've got a chance to atone. One thing COVID did was it shifted all these events quite close together. So it's not like you have to wait for another 2 years or so yet. It's only 18 months now. So we'll see where it goes from there. And then we've had an interesting last 24 hours as well with Cristiano Ronaldo finally settling in Al Nassr. I mean, nobody around Europe actually wanted him. That was the reality of the situation. No, they didn't, because, I mean, he's still a top player, but he doesn't play the way modern teams play. It sounds ridiculous to say.
Ronaldo.
I know it's Ronaldo, yeah, but it doesn't matter anymore because you're inviting. He's become such a circus that you're inviting that into your football club, and it becomes disruptive without him even intending for it to be that way. He gave that interview to Piers Morgan a few weeks ago. I thought it was a good idea at the time. If I was a United fan, I thought I want someone to uncover what's going on there and find out how outdated the thing is and how the training facilities need upgrading. It is good, but most people didn't see it that way. They thought that most managers and clubs looked around it and thought, for the price you pay, you're getting a circus here, and it isn't necessarily very good. He got upstaged at the World Cup by his great rival Lionel Messi as well. So if we're looking at sports people who haven't had a good year, he's certainly on that list.
Is there such a thing as getting too big for the sport?
I don't think it's too big for the sport. He would certainly see it that way. But, I mean, they're so childish. I don't know if you saw I think it was the second World Cup game. He tried to pinch another teammate's goal. And that's the sort of thing I'd have done in the playground when I was 7.
That's awful, yeah.
I know.
That's not good.
I mean, if you forgive me when I was 7, but I mean, it's he's 37 years old and he's trying to pinch someone's goal. So he's chasing these individual records. If you've got a player who's chasing individual records, it's not conducive to the team ethic. And football is more and more a team game than ever before. They don't carry individuals anymore. They attack as a team. They defend as a team. Even the goalkeeper is part of the outfield play now. So I don't think they necessarily wanted that. They looked at the price and they thought, at 37, his legs are going to give way. The science says he can't go on forever. Yeah. We saw Roger Federer's retirement as well. That was a big shame, big loss in tennis as well, especially commercially, because despite what the others will have won more Grand Slams than him. But nobody draws a crowd like Roger Federer. The exhibition, the sponsors, they all want him there. He's the corporate guy as well. Yeah. He's a big loss to tennis. We saw a big run in Wimbledon for Cameron Norrie as well. He beat Rafa Nadal overnight. A little bit of a late starter, 26 years old. He's coming to his own, but who knows? He might have a Wimbledon stab again in May or June.
And of course, Pelé.
Yeah, Pelé, huge loss to our sport as well, football, because he wasn't allowed to play outside of Brazil until the mid-80s. When he went to America, football wasn't even big in Brazil, incredibly. It's the biggest football nation in the world. They were the most successful, certainly, and it wasn't really a thing before he really got going and made his mark. And so by the 80s, he was allowed... His post-football career was actually quite an enlightening experience for him because he was able to tour around the world. And I interviewed him back in 2004-05, and I always remember him. I said, "Oh, Pele, can I have a word? Can I have a word?" And I was with a young guy from the Daily Mirror. We used to knock around together. And exactly. And Pele came back and said to the security guard, "No, I'll chat to them." I maybe just saw talking to two kids like us as part of his ambassadorial role. I mean, he didn't need the column inches, that's for sure.
I love that, though. That's a good sportman, isn't it?
It is. He was, in terms of his accomplishments, his achievements, I think it was 1,200 goals in about 1,300 games, 3 World Cups, a hat-trick in a World Cup final in 1958, aged 18. I mean, that's phenomenal.
Brilliant. Incredible. Thank you very much for that. That's broadcaster and journalist Aidan McGee. Now it's time to look at the year. It's not been the best year for Britain's bank accounts, with households struggling and poverty rising as the cost of living bites. High inflation, bumper energy bills and the rising cost of the weekly shop have driven the economy to the verge of a recession. But is there light at the end of the tunnel? Well, the UK government recently announced a £26 billion support package for 2023 and 2024, with the aim of helping millions of struggling households across the country. To advise us on how to save those pennies, I'm joined by financial expert Jasmine Birtles, founder and editor of moneymagpie.com. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you give us your brief rundown of the best top tips people can enter 2023 with on how to save their pennies?
Well, firstly, I would say don't panic. There's a lot of fear around. People like me are being asked all the time to come up with tips like this. And so increasingly, I'm saying really don't panic. And secondly, I do think that, and this is something I've said for a while, but I think it's even more important now, that we need to get together. We need to share with each other, because on our own, it's going to be really quite tricky. You know, we're coming into another year, I think, of some problems. So together we can be strong. Together we can help each other, our neighbours, our friends, our family, and we can share things so that we all have something. We can all know that we've got something of our own, and we can keep ourselves going, but for a lot less money. So that's my number one tip, and will continue to be for 2023, frankly. Also, though, right now is a really good time to go and have a look at what you've got in the house, see what you can sell, see what you can bring some cash into, because January is a tough month. It's about 5 weeks. We've had Christmas. A lot of people come into January with debt, and it's, as I say, it's a long month to have that debt. So let's see how you can make some more money to pay that off and give yourself a bit of a decent start for the year. And finally, I would say for the moment, I mean, there are a lot more tips, but for the moment, I would say finally, do get help as quickly as possible if you are struggling. And the good news is that there are a lot of places you can go for help, for free help. For example, I'm patron of Community Money Advice, which is a series of debt advice agencies around the country. Many of them work out of churches. You probably know them, Calvin. Also, of course, there's Christians Against Poverty. There's Citizens Advice, Step Change, National Deadline. And if you're having problems with keeping the roof over your head, you're worried about your mortgage, you're worried about your rent, go and see Shelter. It's a great charity, and the earlier they see you, the more they can do for you. So there really is help out there.
Lots and lots of helpful advice there, Jasmine. If you were to give some advice, rather than to individuals, if you were going to give it to the government to fix the economy that they've messed up, what would that be?
Right, let's get a time machine and go back a few years and not lock down and not print insane amounts of money. I don't think, honestly, that increasing interest rates is going to do what they want it to do. It does seem that inflation is coming down naturally anyway, but the point of increasing interest rates is to make money more expensive, to make sure that people don't spend so much, they don't borrow so much, they don't spend so much. They will save instead, because the savings rates will be better. But the point is to therefore bring inflation down. But inflation's going to come down anyway because things are expensive already. People are already not spending. So just putting interest rates up, I think, will simply make it worse for those with mortgages. We could see a lot more repossessions. I would stop that. I would concentrate. To be frank, I would take a leaf out of Liz Truss's mini budget, which everybody slagged off totally, but I was behind it because that was a budget that was trying to go for growth. And I think far worse than inflation is recession. And I do feel that is the biggest worry. Everybody's understandably fussing about inflation, quite right. But we have stagflation at the moment, and the stag part of it, the recession side, that's the worst. And that really is where we need to put our firepower. And again, putting interest rates up is just going to make it harder to get ourselves out of recession because people won't spend.
Absolutely. Sound advice there. Thank you very much, Jasmine Birtles, founder and editor of moneymagpie.com. I've got Belinda DeLucy in the studio with me. Belinda, we mentioned earlier that the lockdowns may have led to us all catching the cold or flu this winter. They also might have led to the economy being collapsed into a recession this year. It seems the lockdown is the result of, well, all of this mess is the result of the lockdowns and the government's reaction to COVID. But how do we fix it?
Oh my gosh, I'm so pleased you highlight this because it's rarely brought up, certainly by the government, that this is the reason we're in this financial state. They keep banging on about Russia and Ukraine as if that is the sole causer of all our woes. And I think people can see through it now. You know, things like the furlough being abused and £5 billion worth of taxpayers' money just being misspent in fraudulent claims and the government not trying to get it back. That's £5 billion. You know, there's this sort of blank cheque culture that the government has, that the British taxpayers' pocket is where they're going to just keep digging into to try and solve all the mistakes they've made. You know, I feel personally attacked by the government nicking into our salary every time they muck up, and they really have. The rot has been setting in long time before the Russia and Ukraine war. So as your guest said, you know, if only we had a time machine and went back, and then we could solve it. But unfortunately, we are where we are. And I also agree with your guest that Liz Truss has some excellent ideas for growth. There's no optimism. How are we going to attract investment if no one's looking up and thinking, wow, but this is going to happen and these low taxes are going to attract new business? It's the stagnation that's quite depressing. But I do like what your guest said about community and helping each other. We've been through recessions before, people of my age and above. This isn't new, having to cut your cloth to the fabric you have and reducing your spending. Find out if someone's on the street, elderly or on their own, take them food, leftovers. When we had our house repossessed when I was younger, we had bags of clothes given to us, left outside our door by neighbours who we didn't even know because there was such community spirit there. And let's try and galvanise that and look after everyone on our street through this time of crisis.
I love that. Let's not always look to the government for responses. Let's look at ourselves. Let's look inward and look at charity. Fantastic advice. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. Lots more coming up on the show this afternoon. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking mostly cloudy with outbreaks of rain, but drier and brighter in the northwest. Here's the details. It will be cold and rather cloudy across northern Scotland this afternoon. There will be some sunny spells at times, but also scattered wintry showers bringing snow to higher ground. The weather over Northern Ireland will be mostly dry with plenty of sunny spells developing. As we head into the afternoon, winds will be falling light. It will remain rather cloudy across northwest England with limited sunny spells here. There will also be some patchy rain or showers at times too. It will be very cloudy across Wales with cloud low enough to bring hill fog at times. There will be outbreaks of locally heavy rain with the driest conditions in the east. It will be overcast in the East Midlands this afternoon with prolonged at times heavy rain for all areas. It will be rather windy with strong gusts, feeling mild for this time of year. East Anglia will be cloudy throughout the afternoon with prolonged spells of locally heavy rain throughout. There will be some drier and brighter spells, but they will be limited. It'll be a windy afternoon across southern England, especially along the coast. It will be cloudy here with spells of locally heavy rain edging eastwards. Further spells of rain across southern areas while remaining cold in the north with wintry showers over northern Scotland. And that's how the weather's shaping up for the rest of the day.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hello and welcome if you just joined us. It's 1 o'clock. I'm the Reverend Calvin Robinson standing in for Alastair Stewart today. On the way, we'll have the NHS and will it be privatised? How will the world mourn former Pope Benedict following the announcement of his death today? And should we pressure ourselves into tough New Year's resolutions? But first, let's get the latest news headlines.
Thanks, Calvin. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. Pope Benedict XVI has died at the age of 95. In a statement, the Vatican said he passed away just after 9:30 this morning within the Vatican City. Pope Benedict was the head of the Catholic Church from 2005 until his resignation in 2013. He became the first pontiff to step down from the role in 600 years due to old age and ill health. From Monday morning, people will be able to pay their respects as he rests in St. Peter's Basilica ahead of his funeral on the 5th of January. Well, the associate editor at the Catholic Herald, Peter Caldwell, told GB News about Pope Benedict's legacy.
Benedict wasn't going to allow people to come in with all kinds of novelties and revolutionary reforms and this kind of thing. He said, no, this is a sacred deposit. This is something which this is what we hold to be true. And it wasn't that he was against homosexuals or against women or anything like that. He was upholding 2,000 years of Christian teaching, and said this is what it means to be a Christian.
And that was the associate editor at the Catholic Herald, Simon Caldwell there. Now, 4 members of the England team who won the Women's Euro 2022 are among those recognised in the New Year Honours List, the first to be issued by King Charles. Captain Leah Williamson has been made an OBE, whilst Lucy Bronze, Beth Mead and Ellen White have been given MBEs. GB News presenter Anne Diamond has received an OBE for her services to public health and to charity, and Queen guitarist and animal welfare campaigner Brian May has received a knighthood.
It's a nice surprise to have this honour put upon me. I also think it comes with a responsibility to behave, I guess to continue to behave in a way which benefits the country and the rest of the population here and the world as well. But I take this responsibility quite seriously anyway.
The Prime Minister has admitted the last 12 months have been tough and warned the UK's problems won't go away next year. In his New Year message to the country, Rishi Sunak said the government will continue to tackle the NHS backlog and illegal immigration. He also said King Charles's coronation will bring the country together.
I'm not going to pretend that all our problems will go away in the new year. But 2023 will give us an opportunity to showcase the very best of Britain on the world stage. In this historic year of His Majesty the King's coronation, we will come together with pride in everything that makes this country great. Yes, 2023 will have its challenges, but the government I lead is putting your priorities first.
The government has confirmed anyone travelling directly from China to England from the 5th of January must show a negative COVID test before their departure. There are no direct flights from China to Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, but the government says it will work with the devolved nations to ensure measures are implemented there. It's amid concerns about surging cases in China following an easing of restrictions. France, Spain and the US have also introduced similar rules. And New Year's celebrations have already begun, with New Zealand and Australia welcoming in 2023. Now, if you're watching us on TV, you'll see these scenes from Sydney, with the fireworks over the iconic Harbour Bridge and Opera House. Absolutely brilliant. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to Calvin.
Welcome back to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson on GB News, and Happy New Year to my friends in Australia. Here's what's coming up this hour. Our thoughts and prayers go out to Pope Benedict XVI, who has died at his Vatican residence aged 95. We'll look back on his life and hear from the Reverend Ed Tomlinson. Plus, pressure is mounting for the NHS as flu and COVID cases are on the rise. Is privatisation the only way for our healthcare system to survive? And with high inflation, widespread industrial action and soaring levels of channel crossings, Rishi Sunak has a tough year ahead. And remember, I want to hear from you guys. What do you think of today's topics? Email us gbviews@gbnews.uk and tweet us @gbnews. Former Pope Benedict XVI has died at his Vatican residence, aged 95, almost a decade after he stood down because of ailing health. His funeral will be held at St. Peter's Square on January the 5th. He led the Catholic Church for less than 8 years until, in 2013, he became the first pope to resign since Gregory XII in 1415. Benedict spent his final years at the Mater Ecclesiae monastery within the walls of the Vatican. Our reporter Cameron Walker takes a look back at his extraordinary life.
It's April 2005. White smoke rises from a chimney above the Vatican. A new pope, the 265th leader of the Catholic Church, has been elected. Pope Benedict XVI aged 78, became the oldest newly elected pope since the 1700s, but also the first German head of the Catholic Church in centuries. Born Joseph Ratzinger in 1927, he lived with his Catholic family in Bavaria. Although his parents were anti-Nazi, Ratzinger was a member of the Hitler Youth. By the end of the Second World War, he was serving as a German soldier. Unwilling to fight, he deserted and was briefly held as a prisoner of war by the Americans. Ratzinger was ordained as a priest in 1951 and was awarded a doctorate in theology at the University of Munich a few years later. He taught at a number of universities before becoming the Archbishop of Munich and Riesling in 1977. He grew close to Pope John Paul II and became one of his closest advisors. Pope John Paul II died in April 2005. Joseph Ratzinger was elected head of the Catholic Church and became Pope Benedict XVI. He continues the legacy of his predecessor by speaking to other religious leaders, particularly Judaism and Islam. He aims to revitalise the Church in Europe and maintains traditional Catholic values relating to sexuality and priestly celibacy. He visited a number of countries in the early years of his papacy, including new guidelines allowing more use of the Latin Mass. He directly addressed historical sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, speaking out against it during a visit to the United Nations, but he came under media scrutiny in his alleged role in the cover-up of sexual and physical abuse cases by parish priests and in schools. The Vatican denounced the allegations as false and calumnious and said its handling of the cases showed wisdom and firmness. In 2013, Pope Benedict XVI announced his imminent resignation due to old age and ill health, making him the first pope in some 600 years to resign. More than 50,000 people crowded St. Peter's Square to watch his final public address. In this year's post-Christmas statement, Pope Francis made a surprise appeal at the end of his address to ask for prayers for former Pope Benedict, saying he was very sick. The Vatican issued a statement that he was receiving constant medical care. But soon after, the 95-year-old passed away in the Vatican, the home of the institution he'd dedicated more than 70 years of his life to. Cameron Walker, GB News.
And we'll have more on that later. Now, the NHS say they are struggling to cope with what they're calling a twin-demic of COVID and flu, as the number of patients in hospital with the latter condition rose by 80% in a week, according to the latest data. It's not just capacity that's an issue, though. Ongoing industrial action has also crippled the healthcare system. Nurses walked out for the first time in 100 years earlier this month, and ambulance workers followed closely behind. Joining me now is Dr. Anita Raja, a GP based in Birmingham. Thank you, Dr. Anita, for joining us today. How are you finding things at the moment?
I think it's pretty dire because the winter months are challenging anyway for the NHS because of the winter pressures. And you've called it a twin-demic. I'd say it's a triple-demic here because we also have a surge of strep A, which is a huge concern. Yes, there are staffing issues, but the staffing issues may not just be the only problems within the NHS. At the moment, if you come to look at the way the system has been designed, I think it's hugely failed the public because the nurses haven't just decided to walk out last minute. It's something that has culminated due to years of inefficiency within the managerial system. Now, if you look at the way the NHS is designed, unfortunately, one person has to do the work of 10. People are burning out. There is a pay problem. There is an appreciation problem. People don't feel that they are given much more than valueless claps. And of course, people are burning out and want to leave the profession. So yes, it's absolutely dire. I agree with you.
The problem is these strikes, and I understand what you're saying in that they're not last minute, they're well thought through, etc. However, will they not make matters worse? If nurses are suddenly gone from the situation for a moment of time and things are already at a stressful level, will care?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question you've asked me. But you see, you've got to understand that at the moment, the nurses are striking because one nurse is probably doing the work of 10, and patients are at risk anyway. They are at risk every single day, every single minute. The waiting times in a hospital in A&E is anything between 16 to 24 hours. You could be waiting 2 days before you're given a bed. The strike is not just about pay. The strike is because our NHS healthcare staff are feeling undervalued and overworked. I mean, at the moment, if you are under the impression that people are safe, I'm willing to tell you with assurance they're not. The ambulances are taking 8 hours to get to people. People are having to use their own transport, even if they are worried about a heart attack, because it's easier to get to the hospital. The NHS is at breaking point. In fact, I would say that it's already broken. And what are the managers doing to amend the situation? What is anybody doing? I mean, they're nicely tucked away in their offices while the frontline workers who are, your HCAs, your nurses, your doctors, they're facing all the abuse. And at the end of the day, they're being blamed for all the failures of the NHS and the ministers. So yes, we're under huge pressure at the moment, but I wouldn't say that it's the nurses who are at fault because they're walking out. They're walking out because people are dying every single day in A&E corridors because they're not getting help soon enough.
I'm with you, Dr. Anita. I'm with you. I see that the NHS doesn't work. It's not fit for purpose anymore. I see that it's on the brink of collapse if it hasn't already collapsed. I'm with you on that entirely. My question, however, is, it seemed to me that the strikes were about pay, but if they're about working conditions, fair enough. But what are the conditions we want to change? Do we want to get rid of this managerial structure, get rid of all the bureaucracy? What improvements do we want to see made to make the NHS work again?
Yes, to answer this question, I think all the health minister needs to do is spend 12 hours in any local A&E to see what needs to be done to make the system more workable. At the moment, we've got a funding issue, I understand that. But, at the same time, we've got to understand that nobody can work for free. Our nurses are going to food banks. They are unable to afford, heating their homes. They're unable to afford buying their groceries. They're unable to fill their tanks if they are district nurses. Now, how are we expecting people to work under these conditions? If you look at junior doctors, as you are well aware, they're going to be striking soon as well. And that's also because they're unable to afford living. A foundation year doctor earns absolutely nothing at the moment. And what for? There's absolutely no appreciation. Somebody needs to sit down and just look at all the aspects that need to be addressed. 12 hours in A&E is enough. 12 hours in A&E. That's all you need to do.
Let's make sure the Health Minister and the Prime Minister spend 12 hours in an A&E. That's Dr. Anita Raja, a GP based in Birmingham. Thank you so much for your time today. And joining me in the studio is Belinda DeLucy. Belinda, I'm not sure a strike can help change the situation of appreciation of our health workers, but is there a way that we can fix the NHS, do you think, or is it just beyond repair and it needs privatisation?
Well, I certainly think the NHS has enough money. We give enough money to the NHS. We've never spent more money in our history with the NHS than we do now. It's about management of money. So we need to stop throwing people's tax money into these sort of burning fuel drums and just seeing it going up in smoke. So that's the first thing. We have enough money. Now, it's about wastage and it's about using agency staff. It's so expensive to the taxpayer. It's about missed appointments costing, £200 million a year to the taxpayer. And when Rishi goes to the British Medical Association with something to fix it, like a £10 fine for repeat offenders, they reject it. It's really difficult to manage the NHS when it's become so political as well. However, the working conditions picked up by Dr. Anita just now are 100% back. They are terrible for junior doctors. And in fact, doctors, it's insane the amount of paperwork our highly skilled doctors are having to do instead of see patients. They're having to spend hours filling out forms when that should be done by middle management. Why aren't we doing that? We need to attract and keep more doctors and stop stripping poorer countries of their medical staff and train up our own medical staff, which we're not doing, especially where are our nursing colleges. They should be built up across the country, and we should be paying them a good and decent wage. But now is not the time for insane salary increases. They know that. We don't have the money for it. And now is not the time for a strike when the NHS is at breaking point. But I do support them in their working conditions. I do not think we treat them very well. Doctors commit suicide between 2 and 5% more than the general population. 7% of medical students leave medicine within 3 years. And why are so many leaving the profession? Because it's also a bullying environment, because everyone's exhausted and stressed with the emotional toil of holding people's lives in their hands every day and not being paid enough. They're grumpy with each other and grouchy with each other. So we do need to change the working conditions for doctors.
But we know how to do this. We know how it used to work with the whole system of matrons and, for example, nurses don't necessarily need to have degree qualifications. Like you say, they can have homegrown talent. We know how to make the NHS work. Why are we not doing this?
Well, this is a big question for Rishi next year. Will he reset the working conditions? Are so important because I genuinely believe people go into medicine out of goodwill, philanthropy, but they can't work for free. And Rishi needs to set good working conditions for them, pay them enough by not charging the taxpayers more, but by using money they spend on stupid diversity and inclusion positions, which cost millions of pounds in the NHS. And, oh, my God, don't even get me started on that. But there's such a waste of money. We have enough money, reset it, better working conditions. That's for Rishi next year.
Love that. Let's see what happens. Thank you very much, Belinda de Lucy. Now, returning to the sad death of the former Pope Benedict XVI. Tributes are pouring in from across the world, with Rishi Sunak, the latest world leader, to praise his work. And joining me now is the Reverend Ed Tomlinson, priest of the Ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham. Father Ed, thank you so much for joining me today. Could you start out by please telling us, I know you're a convert to the Catholic faith from Anglicanism. Could you first tell us, did the Pope have any impact on that journey?
He had an enormous impact. For many years, I'd been thinking personally about making the journey into the Catholic Church from the Church of England. But when Pope Benedict really gave a strong lead in wanting to defend the faith against worldliness and uphold all the doctrines, that inspired me enormously. And when he announced he was going to open the Ordinariate for people who wanted to come across but retain their English patrimony, I was one of the very first people. I just knew in my heart I wanted to go. He was a huge inspiration, a great theologian, and a great man of God.
Well, I don't think that's emphasised enough that he was a great theologian. I read his book recently, The Jesus of Nazareth, which for me just speaks entirely of what Jesus was about. But it's great to have church leaders, isn't it, who are theologians, who have that background, who can be leaders of the spiritual realm as well as the earthly realm.
I think it's essential, and I would actually say probably the most important thing about Pope Benedict is that he was one of the most learned men in church history. I genuinely think he will become a doctor of the church. I think there have been very few people as intellectually capable as him. His legacy to the church is really going to be found in everything he wrote, which was exhaustive. And really, I think, I was really touched when he came to England and walked with Her Majesty the Queen. And I really did think we were seeing the end of a very great generation, the likes of which we've not really seen since. There seems to have been a dumbing down throughout the 20th century, and I think our leaders aren't quite as impressive as the generation before them. This was a man who spoke many languages, a man who knew ancient church history, who had studied the fathers, and every time he spoke, it was just pearls of wisdom. And really, I don't think there's a prelate alive who's really at the same standard that he set for the church.
Well, he followed in huge footsteps as well, didn't he? Of course, Jean Paul II made him prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. But prior to that, he was actually quite a liberal priest, wasn't he, before he became a cardinal?
Yeah, I think one of the problems that the world has in understanding popes is it tries to see them through a worldly political lens. So people want Pope Benedict to be the traditional conservative, Pope Francis to be the liberal lefty. But actually, they don't often work those titles. I would say there are two very distinct schools of thinking in the church. One of them is quite modernist, wanting to open the church up to the world, and that would be really Francis's steer. Pope Benedict stood for the other great school of thinking in the church that says we need to preserve the wisdom of the past, obedience and fidelity to it. And that really is, I think, again, where he came in. So he was very liberal in terms of wanting to embrace everyone and reach and speak out to the world. He was liberal in the good sense of the word, you know. What he wasn't was a big left-wing politician, which is what the world wants the Pope to be.
But Father Ed, the Catholic faith is a faith rooted in tradition, obviously. It's handed down from Christ through the apostles to us. We believe in apostolic succession, etc. It's a faith that is rooted in tradition. And many are saying that with the death of Pope Benedict XVI, there is no longer a leader holding on to that tradition, and the modernists will get their way, and the church will be opened up to the world and become of the world.
Well, I think I would say that actually Pope Benedict inspired a lot of very young Catholics. So I think the reality is, in the long term, I have great optimism for the church. I think today, if you're going to be Catholic, you want the faith in its fullness. I see a lot of young people who hunger to be faithful, who hunger for the beauty of the ancient Mass, all these things. The difficulty, I think, is that we have got a generation in power at the moment who are probably the boomer generation, whose entire ministry was spent trying to kind of bring in felt banners and, you know, ban the bomb type religion. Very Anglican in a sense. And so we've got this little bulge at the moment where I think power's a little bit too much in one camp. But actually, there aren't many young people who are inspired by that. So I think in the short term, we've got a rocky road. But I think in the long term, the church will come back roaring into life, actually, as more people realise that perhaps the wisdom of the church down the ages is something missing from our rather vacuous and confused culture today.
I hope you're right, but to give a practical example, of course, Pope Benedict was in favour and helped encourage the use of the Latin Mass, whereas Pope Francis, of course, has almost outlawed its practice around the world, and more traditional Catholics are looking towards things like the Latin Mass to re-find truth and beauty and goodness. So where do you see that happening?
Well, I'm a great optimist. I believe in the power of the Holy Spirit. And I would say that, you know, there's a great, lovely story that Napoleon once said to the Pope, "I'm going to destroy your church." And the Pope said, "Well, we Catholics have been trying for 1,500 years and we've not managed it." I do think we've got some real challenges. I think there are some very politically motivated ideologues in power in the church at the moment who are trying to suppress and thwart people who simply want to be faithful. And, you know, so I do think there is a culture battle going on. But in a way, I think those of us who love Pope Benedict, the way we can really honour him is to fight for the true faith, to dare to stand up and be counted. And actually, the good news is, you know, we've got God on our side, so I'm feeling quite positive.
Yeah, or rather, we're on the side of God. Father Ed, to give us some good news, tell us about the Ordinariate and the great work that Benedict put through there to help Anglicans keep their patrimony whilst joining the communion with Rome.
Well, it's tremendously exciting. I mean, Pope Benedict, many people may not realise, was a great Anglophile. He loved this country, and he loved especially the great St. John Henry Newman, a man who famously had been raised as an Oxford academic, a member of the Church of England, but who became Catholic and ended up being quite instrumental in his writing and indeed in influencing the Second Vatican Council. So Pope Benedict realised, I think, that in a sense, the English way, that the Anglican patrimony has lost its true faith. And the more that the Church of England was just becoming very worldly and into environmentalism and all that, there was a real need to retain the best of Anglican patrimony, which is English patrimony. A reminder that actually Oxford and Cambridge, our great schools, our great universities, all of these were forged in England when it had a beating Catholic heart. So he asked those of us to come over, not to just go native, but to hold on to the story of pre-Reformation England, the fact that actually Western culture is a Catholic Christian thing and something worthy to be preserved. So we've entered the Catholic Church and we have our own Mass with Cranmerian, beautiful language, all stemming from the very ancient rites that were here in England before Henry VIII took his wrecking ball out. We've kept some of that beauty, some of that, and a real emphasis on the English saints. We've got Cardinal Newman, now St. John Henry Newman as a patron, Our Lady of Walsingham, the great story there. A really English feeling way of being Catholic to remind us what really unity is all about. It's a tremendous gift. We are, in the Ordinariate, I always like to say, Benedict's babies. I think he's one of our patrons too, really. One day to be a saint.
And I can really recommend people look up your literature as well, the Divine Missal as well as the Divine Worship Office, fantastic Cranmerian language within the Catholic structure. Father Ed Tomlinson, thank you so much for joining us today. Really do appreciate it.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you, Father Calvin.
You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. Coming up, we'll bring you the latest on the struggles facing the NHS as we go live to our reporter on the ground at one of the country's major hospitals. Back after the break and weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking mostly cloudy with outbreaks of rain, but drier and brighter in the northwest. Here's the details. It will be cold and rather cloudy across northern Scotland this afternoon. There will be some sunny spells at times, but also scattered wintry showers bringing snow to higher ground. The weather over Northern Ireland will be mostly dry with plenty of sunny spells developing. As we head into the afternoon, winds will be falling light. It will remain rather cloudy across northwest England with limited sunny spells here. There will also be some patchy rain or showers at times too. It will be very cloudy across Wales with cloud low enough to bring hill fog at times. There will be outbreaks of locally heavy rain with the driest conditions in the east. It will be overcast in the East Midlands this afternoon with prolonged at times heavy rain for all areas. It will be rather windy with strong gusts, feeling mild for this time of year. East Anglia will be cloudy throughout the afternoon with prolonged spells of locally heavy rain throughout. There will be some drier and brighter spells, but they will be limited. It'll be a windy afternoon across southern England, especially along the coast. It will be cloudy here with spells of locally heavy rain edging eastwards. Further spells of rain across southern areas while remaining cold in the north with wintry showers over northern Scotland. And that's how the weather's shaping up for the rest of the day.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious, much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Good afternoon. It's 1:32. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. The Vatican has announced the death of Pope Benedict XVI at the age of 95. Pope Benedict was the head of the Catholic Church from 2005 until his resignation in 2013. He became the first pontiff to step down from the role in 600 years due to old age and ill health. Pope Francis will lead his funeral on the 5th of January in St. Peter's Square. 4 Lionesses who won the Women's Euro 2022 are among those recognised in the New Year Honours List, the first to be issued by King Charles. Captain Leah Williamson has been made an OBE, while her teammates Lucy Bronze, Beth Mead and Ellen White have been given MBEs. GB News' own Anne Diamond also received an OBE for services to public health and charity, and Queen guitarist Brian May has received a knighthood. The Prime Minister has admitted the last 12 months have been tough and warned the UK's problems won't go away next year. In his New Year message to the UK, Rishi Sunak said the government will continue to tackle the NHS backlog and illegal immigration. He also said King Charles's coronation will bring the country together. And the government has confirmed anyone travelling directly from China to England from the 5th of January must show a negative COVID test before their departure. There are no direct flights from China to Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, but the government says it will work with the devolved nations to ensure measures are implemented there. It's amid concerns about surging cases in China following an easing of restrictions. France, Spain and the US also introduced similar rules. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB Plus radio. This is GB News. Now let's get back to Calvin.
Welcome back. Now, before we cross over to Birmingham Hospital, let's read out a few of your views on today's topics. On our earlier conversation on New Year's honours, Daryl says, the list of people who are rewarded by the King just shows how nonsensical and farcical this list is. The Lionesses team should have been rewarded, not just 4 members. The whole team won the Euros. It's unjustly unfair to the team. It's a good point. I'm not entirely sure why only 4 people were, but Pam says, Happy New Year to you all at GB News. We really need your station. Oh, thank you, Pam. That's very kind. Keep your views coming in and do subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are at GB News. Well, more on the struggles of the NHS now as they face a so-called twindemic of COVID and the flu. Or as my last guest, Dr. Anita Raja, just suggested, maybe even a triple-demic with Strep A in the mix too. Let's cross over to our News West Midlands reporter, Jack Carson, who joins us from Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. Good afternoon, Jack.
Well, Calvin, the surge in the surge in the number of patients over the last few weeks here and across NHS England with flu has risen about, like you said, 7 times, around 79% in just the last week. So there is a big surge, big surge in flu cases. Around 3,746 people were in hospital with flu in the week running up to Christmas, and that was about just 772 at the start of the month. With that just short few few weeks, you can see how rapidly cases of flu have risen. Although not all of those are in a critical condition. There's around 267 in the week leading up to Christmas that were being treated in critical care. But when you get to critical care with flu, it's not something that can be treated. There's not really any cure for other than oxygen and kind of some minor kind of treatments that you can get in hospital. In terms of who's been admitted to critical care, what we've seen from the University of Birmingham Hospital Trust and their Associate Professor in Acute and Critical Care, Professor Dhruv Parekh, he says that we do have young patients, pregnant patients, as well as people who do not typically fall into a vulnerable category, having to go into critical care and receive sedation and also ventilation as well. So this is a strong variant of flu that is getting people and having people admitted to hospital that wouldn't usually fall into those vulnerable categories. Of course, we know that over 65s and other groups are eligible for a vaccine for the flu, which should stop serious illness. We know roughly every year there's around an 80% uptake of that, but this year's flu variant obviously causing more problems than we've seen in other years as well. In terms of the effect that that's actually had across the country, in terms of the NHS as well, because of course we know that if there's flu in the hospitals, staff and nurses can also come down with an illness and end up being absent. We've heard today on the programme about some of the issues that some of the wards are facing with the NHS around understaffing, etc. So when you have absences like 60,500 absences of staff sickness every day last week, that's up almost a fifth on last month, combined with flu, of course, some COVID cases as well, where around 7,200 NHS staff were off with COVID in the last week. That does cause pressure on the NHS, on top of the flu, on top of COVID as well. But the NHS committing to the fact they say they are prepared for winter. The Professor Sir Stephen Powis, who's the NHS National Medical Director, says that the NHS is prepared for winter extensively with more beds, extra call handlers, as well as the expansion of falls response services, control centres and respiratory hubs, and that if you do need advice on your flu symptoms and how to treat your flu symptoms if it's not serious, then to call 111. And with 111, we have seen 721,301 calls last week. That's up 60% on this time last year. So a real evidence there of that actually flu with Strep A and COVID-19 is becoming a big problem for the NHS over this winter period.
Thank you very much, Jack Carson there at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. You are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. Plenty more still to come this afternoon. With high inflation, a cost of living crisis or a cost of lockdown crisis, migration and much more filling the Prime Minister's in tray, how will he fare in 2023? And why do we pressure ourselves into New Year's resolutions? We'll hear from a psychologist. But first, let's take a quick break. See you soon.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. B, I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. It's 20 to 2 and you are watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. With widespread industrial action, stubbornly high inflation, soaring channel crossings, a volatile NHS and a cost of lockdown crisis, it's safe to say Rishi Sunak has his hands full at the close of 2022. And with the Conservatives still lagging behind Labour in the polls, the Prime Minister might be fighting for his political life in 2023. Here's what Sunak and Labour's Keir Starmer had to say as they laid out their battle plans for the new year.
But 2023 will give us an opportunity to showcase the very best of Britain on the world stage, continuing to stand with our Ukrainian friends against Putin's brutality and defending freedom and democracy wherever we find it under threat.
For hope to flourish, Britain needs to change. The way working people are struggling this winter, the way our public services are on the brink, demands nothing less. So this year, my Labour Party will set out the case for change, the case for a new Britain, the case for hope, a country where we can grow the economy for everyone, not just the privileged few.
Belinda de Lucy, with such a full in-tray, will the Prime Minister survive 2023, do you think?
Well, I think it's the Conservative Party's in-tray from 2019. I mean, poor Rishi has kind of been stuck with so much stuff that Boris never got round to either. You know, all the commitments to reducing immigration in the manifesto, to turning the boats back, to lowering taxes. You know, the inbox has been like this for the whole term. There's very little that Tories have done. I know there have been distractions, but
there always are.
There always are. There is not a lot of time left, and I think I get a sense, certainly from talking to people, that listening to more pledges and I'm going to do this in 2023 and I'm going to do that, and it's people are zoning out because there's been so little action. So Rishi needs to actually do something rather than promise or pledge to do anything now. He needs to do what the Conservatives promised to do in 2019. He needs to get that EU revocation and reform bill through and start, you know, doing the bonfire of EU regulations that will save businesses £1 billion a year. This should have been done, you know, in 2019. So unfortunately, he has inherited a really large inbox, and it's only grown because, of course, the cost of living and the migration crisis as well. It's not just about the boats. It is 500,000 people coming over every year. You know, we're just talking about our NHS. How on earth are we going to provide healthcare with 500,000 new people coming in every year without the infrastructure? So Rishi has got a very full inbox, but I don't blame him entirely. I think the Conservative Party from day one has fallen behind on its manifesto. Does it have time to catch up and actually get things in place before the next election? I'm not sure. I doubt the voters will believe any more promises and any more manifestos they have to offer in the next election, so they need to get going.
No, you're right. I don't particularly like his prime ministerial position. However, it's not just him. David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, What did any of them achieve that was conservative? Can you name one conservative thing they achieved?
OK, well, I think David Cameron allowing a referendum for Brexit was a fantastic thing that Conservative Party did. Well, Nigel Farage 100% achieved that, but it was only because the Conservative Party put it in their manifesto and delivered on it. Remember the days? They actually delivered on it, that we were able to get out of the sort of, corrupt EU evolving empire thing. So that was great. And they did get Brexit over the line. I know it was a bit of a dog's dinner deal, so I will credit Boris with that. And there are things to be excited about and hopeful for, but I'm not sure they had the time to do. I think they've let the country down, themselves down. They're infighting.
Let the whole class down.
The whole class down. And also, this is another thing in Rishi's in tray. Is he going to be able to hold the Tory party together? And is he going to be able to fend off Boris's interests of maybe coming back in the next year or so? Who knows?
Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing. Who knows? From the 5th of January, travellers from China will need a negative COVID test to enter the UK in a major government U-turn. Yet another one. Several countries, including the US, France and India, have already imposed testing. Rishi Sunak's move comes after Tory MPs called for a robust response to surging COVID cases in China, following Beijing's abandonment of its zero COVID policy. To discuss this further, I'm now joined by Tim White, data and COVID expert. COVID expert, Tim, what does that mean?
It means I try to analyse what's going on in the world and try to understand trends and risks to all of us as well. But before we go any further, Calvin, Happy New Year to you, all your hard-working staff there and all the viewers.
Oh, Happy Christmas to you too as well. Tim, we're hearing a lot of talk about China, but China is, well, let's just say they're not very open and transparent with their data. So how do we know there's even a problem over there?
Well, we know from reporters there, we know from a few leaks that come out, we've seen the pictures, hospitals are overloaded, there are numerous funerals. It's a terrible situation. It's been badly handled, in my opinion, by the state there. The lockdown and zero COVID policy was perhaps not a bad one initially. We saw Australia and New Zealand particularly have some success with this, but failing to make sure that the vaccination rates were high enough, and also not allowing any mixing, not being a gradual shift, has really caused problems because people didn't have any innate immunity. The virus hadn't been circulating as it had even in Australia and New Zealand before they really opened the floodgates. And this has caused a huge problem there, as you can see from the pictures we're showing and the stories that are coming out, despite, as you said, the attempt to probably cover it up.
COVID expert. Nice analysis there. Cheers very much. Now, after a festive season of overindulgence, New Year yields the start of a fresh slate for the 12 months ahead. Popular resolutions, of course, include getting fitter and losing weight and giving up smoking, Belinda, to name a few. But why do we put ourselves under pressure to set these goals on January the 1st? To find out the mentality behind this, I'm joined in the studio by Peter Ayton, Professor of Decision Research at the University of Leeds. Professor Peter, why do people do this to themselves?
Well, I mean, if you look at the data, which is what I always like to do rather than just pontificate in speculative ways, you can observe that not just the new year, but the start of the month, the beginning of the week, the start of a new term for my students, that's when visits to the gym go up. And people seem to naturally perceive themselves as being able to put their past wicked self behind them at a sort of temporal milestone, like a year or even a month or a week. So it seems to have a sort of, it's like a little mental conjuring trick that we can play on ourselves to exploit this opportunity to put ourselves in our bad self in the past and then to start afresh.
That sounds quite healthy to me. It sounds like the confessional. You go in there, you're rid of your sins, you have absolution, and then you go out and start afresh. Of course, you'll sin again, you'll have that bar of chocolate again, but it's nice to have a reset point, isn't it?
Well, I mean, the question is, does it actually work? I mean, does it actually really help you sort of move on and improve yourself? And, you mentioned it, cynicism. There are lots of studies showing that, people fall off the wagon and, start smoking days or weeks at most after having promised they'd never smoke another cigarette again. Ditto alcohol, ditto many things that people promise not to do. Nonetheless, there are some studies showing that, making a New Year's resolution, specifically a New Year's resolution, is better than not doing so, at least for some people.
Yeah.
And so the question then is, well, how come the people who succeed and the people who don't? And I can give you an idea of that too, which is essentially that a lot of people who make New Year's resolutions just really espouse a desirable state without, in fact, having a plan for how to achieve it. So they just say, oh, I'm going to do this, or I'm not going to do that. But then when you say, OK, how are you going to manage that? Because all the years of your life to date, you've been as bad as you are. What's going to change?
Yeah.
And often a lot of people are stumped. But if you have a plan, and there are various sort of tricks that you can employ to sort of institute, an actual intervention, positive steps, that is, demonstrably much more effective.
Right. So let's ask Belinda de Lucy. Belinda, do you have any New Year's resolutions this year?
Well, as you alluded to earlier, Calvin, I unfortunately did take up vaping during lockdown, but I think lots of people took up very bad habits during lockdown. The amount of time you sit on the sofa on your phone, staying indoors, not necessarily going out and grabbing every day the fresh air outside. So I think, especially with, my kids, I need to get them outside more, get them off their phones more. So it's sort of more New Year's resolutions I'm going to do to them than I'm going to do to myself. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it depends on the person, but you have to really want to stop. Yeah. But otherwise, actually, saints and Puritans are not that much fun to hang around with. So I don't think we should set standards too high. We are humans. We need our vices in moderation. They always say that the secret to long life is everything in moderation, not, total puritanical, lifestyle.
I am against Puritanism, but I do like high standards. Professor Peter, I also heard that it helps if you publicly pronounce your resolutions.
Yeah, I mean, apropos what you just mentioned as well, it definitely helps if the desire for change comes from within and rather being visited upon people. That doesn't really work. But if people express themselves a desire to change, then you're in with a chance. Of course, there's no guarantees. I've forgotten the question that you asked me now. What was that?
It helps to publicly tell people.
Yeah, so if you publicly, literally sign a document, write something out in public, give it to the people who will most likely taunt you when you fail, and you sign it saying, I'm going to do the following things. And by the way, it's not just, I'm going to do less of this, more of that. You have to actually implement a specific plan. Yeah. So you're going to say, I'm going to the gym, not just more often or twice a week. I'm going on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6:30. So you have to be as specific as you possibly can, and then it's obvious when you're, you've got no room for manoeuvre at that point, and then you tend to, you can still fail, but there's a standard that you can be held by.
I think that's very helpful information. So the next time people are posting their New Year's resolution on Facebook, put how they're going to stick to it as well, and they've got a better chance of...
And maybe doing it with a friend, signing up to the gym with a friend so you know that someone's there waiting for you.
I think that's a cop-out, though, because the friend always drops out, and then it's an excuse not to go,
That's true, that's true.
But thank you very much. That was Professor Peter Ayton, Professor of Decision Research at the University of Leeds. Now, let's end on a few of your emails, because you've been sending in quite a few interesting things. And Paul says, regarding nurses, a bin man never stops from start of the shift to end of shift. Supermarket shelf fillers, they never stop too. Doing the same thing day in and day out, it seems like the nurses don't think of others. Interesting point of view, Paul. There are a lot of people around the country working very, very hard. It's not just the nurses. However, they seem to be taking priority at the moment. Is it a case that everyone needs to be paid more, everyone needs to be appreciated more, and that will make the country a better place for all of us? Onto the New Year honours list. Paula, via Twitter, says, honours lists have become a farce. Those that deserve don't get one, and oh, okay, yeah. There are many people that do deserve honours that do get them, and it's a great thing to see. However, of course, as Belinda was saying earlier, there are a few politicians and people that slip onto the list too that we shouldn't necessarily see on there, and it kind of dilutes the whole process. I would like to see it clean cut, much like Belinda says, get the politicians and the civil servants off the list and make sure it's philanthropists and people that are doing good work for the country. Give them the honours, give them the rewards. Elizabeth tweeted, rest in peace, Pope Benedict, a true man of God. Thank you so much for getting in touch, guys. I really appreciate those emails and tweets. And I'd like to say a special thank you to Belinda and Lucy. You've got 30 seconds to wrap up, Belinda. What are you looking forward to in 2023?
I'm a total optimist and I'm always so hopeful when a new year begins. I think we will see a wonderful moment when the King is coronated that will unite the country again and lift our spirits, and we'll forget about all the divisions on Twitter and social media and in politics, and we'll be sleeping side by side on the Mall the night before, ready to cheer the new King in. I'm really excited about that, and I think it will remake our image again to the world after it's had a bit of battering from Harry and Meghan over the past few months. So I'm very excited about that.
I love that. It's very positive. Something that unites us all, brings us all together. That is the job of the monarchy after all, isn't it? That's all we've got time for today. Up next is an On the Money special with GB News' own Liam Halligan. I will be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a happy new year. And of course, it's still Christmas, so Merry Christmas. God bless.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking mostly cloudy with outbreaks of rain, but drier and brighter in the northwest. Here's the details. It will be cold and rather cloudy across northern Scotland this afternoon. There will be some sunny spells at times, but also scattered wintry showers bringing snow to higher ground. The weather over Northern Ireland will be mostly dry with plenty of sunny spells developing. As we head into the afternoon, winds will be falling light. It will remain rather cloudy across northwest England with limited sunny spells here. There will also be some patchy rain or showers at times too. It will be very cloudy across Wales with cloud low enough to bring hill fog at times. There will be outbreaks of locally heavy rain with the driest conditions in the east. It will be overcast in the East Midlands this afternoon with prolonged at times heavy rain for all areas. It will be rather windy with strong gusts, feeling mild for this time of year. East Anglia will be cloudy throughout the afternoon with prolonged spells of locally heavy rain throughout. There will be some drier and brighter spells, but they will be limited. It'll be a windy afternoon across southern England, especially along the coast. It will be cloudy here with spells of locally heavy rain edging eastwards. Further spells of rain across southern areas while remaining cold in the north with wintry showers over northern Scotland. And that's how the weather's shaping up for the rest of the day.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television and online, across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud